white dress, platinum blonde hair, standing at the end of the 10th floor hallway at 3:47 a.m. Security camera footage from Hollywood's Roosevelt Hotel, March 2019. The figure is there for exactly 6 seconds, not walking, not moving, just standing in front of Suite 1200, staring at the camera with a face the resolution can't quite capture. Then she's gone, not walking away, not ducking into a room, just gone. The hotel's explanation? Lens flare, a trick of the emergency exit lighting. But here's what they can't explain. 18 guests since 1962 have reported the exact same thing. A woman in a white dress, always blonde, always alone, always near Suite 1200 or the Tropicana Pool, the two places Marilyn Monroe spent the most time during her early career. All of them described the same woman, the same white dress, the same frozen moment of someone who looks like they're waiting for a photographer to say action. But the most disturbing detail isn't what these witnesses saw, it's what they felt. Every single person reported the same sensation, overwhelming sadness, a grief so profound it made them want to cry without understanding why. The kind of loneliness that comes from being the most famous woman in the world and having no one to call when the lights go out. If you want to discover the untold stories behind Hollywood's greatest mysteries, subscribe now, because what happened at the Roosevelt Hotel is just the beginning of Marilyn's impossible presence in places she should have left behind forever. The Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel wasn't just another luxury accommodation when it opened its doors in 1927. It was a temple of celluloid dreams where studio executives made deals over bourbon, where starlets practiced their smiles in Art Deco mirrors, where the entire machinery of America's most powerful industry gathered to celebrate itself. On February 16, 1929, the Blossom Ballroom hosted the first Academy Awards ceremony. But the Roosevelt's true claim to immortality wouldn't come from Oscar night. It would come from a young woman who walked through those doors in 1948, carrying a portfolio from Blue Book Modeling Agency and dreams bigger than her paycheck could support. Her name was Norma Jeane Dougherty. The world would know her as Marilyn Monroe. Between 1948 and 1951, Marilyn lived in Suite 1200, a cabana-style room overlooking the Tropicana Pool. She would stand in front of the full-length mirror for hours, practicing the Monroe walk, perfecting that half-lidded gaze, modulating her voice from Norma Jeane's natural speaking tone into something breathier, more vulnerable, more designed for male fantasy. The mirror watched Norma Jeane die and Marilyn Monroe be born. It reflected a million private moments of doubt, determination, calculation, hope. The poolside photo shoots became legendary. Marilyn posed in white one-pieces that clung to curves she'd carefully cultivated. She smiled for cameras held by men who saw her as just another pretty girl in a city full of pretty girls. She didn't know yet that 20 years later, those same photographs would sell for thousands of dollars. By 1953, Marilyn Monroe was the most photographed woman in America. By 1962, she was dead at 36, found face down in her Brentwood bedroom with enough barbiturates in her system to stop her heart forever. But something stayed behind at the Roosevelt Hotel, something that hotel management would spend the next 60 years trying to explain away. The report started almost immediately after her death. Guests checking into Suite 1200 would call the front desk with the same complaint. There was something wrong with the mirror. Some said it felt cold to the touch, even on hot August nights. Others reported that their reflection looked strange in it, distorted, shadowy, as if someone else was standing just behind them. A few claimed they saw a woman's face that wasn't their own, blonde, beautiful, sad. Maria Rodriguez was the first housekeeper to file an official report in 19. She unlocked Suite 1200 to begin her routine and found the room ice cold. She approached the mirror to wipe it down and saw for just a moment a reflection that made her drop her cleaning supplies. A woman in a white dress, blonde hair perfectly styled, standing in the mirror's reflection where Maria's own image should have been. When Maria blinked, the image was gone. 3 months later, another housekeeper reported the exact same thing. Then a guest. Then a night manager who'd gone to Suite 1200 to investigate a noise complaint and found himself staring at a mirror that seemed to be reflecting a room that wasn't quite the same as the one he was standing in. The furniture was in slightly different positions, and standing near the window, so faint he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it, was the silhouette of a woman who turned toward him before disappearing like morning fog. By 1975, Suite 1200 had become impossible to rent for more than one night. Hotel management made a decision. If guests were disturbed by the mirror, remove the mirror. In 1976, they took the mirror from Suite 1200 and moved it to the manager's office. For 3 weeks, this seemed to work. Then the manager started experiencing something he couldn't explain. Every morning when he arrived at his office, the mirror would be facing the wall, turned completely around, as if someone had physically rotated its heavy frame during the night when the office was locked and alarmed. This continued for a month, and then one evening, working late, he glanced up at the mirror and saw her. Not a vague silhouette. Marilyn Monroe, as clear as a photograph, standing in his office doorway. She was wearing a white dress. Her platinum hair was styled in those famous waves, and she was looking directly at him with an expression he would later describe as confused, like she didn't know why she was there or how to leave. He stood up. She was gone. The next day, he had the mirror moved to the hotel lobby near the elevator bank, but instead of diluting the phenomenon, putting the mirror in a high-traffic area amplified it. Guest after guest reported seeing a blonde woman in the reflection, not standing behind them, not in the physical space of the lobby, inside the mirror itself, as if the glass was a window into a room where Marilyn Monroe was still getting ready for a photo shoot that would never end. The most famous incident happened in 1985. Suzanne Leonard was a cleaning attendant polishing the lobby mirror when she saw a woman standing directly behind her in the reflection. White dress, blonde hair, that unmistakable face. Suzanne spun around so fast she nearly dropped her supplies. The lobby was empty. No woman, no footsteps, no perfume, just empty space where a person had been reflected 1 second earlier. Suzanne Leonard quit the next day and told her story to a local newspaper. The legend of the Roosevelt's haunted mirror became national news. By 1990, the mirror had been moved to basement storage, wrapped in protective cloth, hidden away like a cursed object. But the sightings continued. If you check into the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel today and ask for Suite 1200, they'll rent it to you without mentioning its history. But guests who've never heard the Marilyn ghost story call the front desk with the same complaint. There's someone in their room, a blonde woman in a white dress. She doesn't speak, she doesn't threaten, she just appears, usually near the window or by the closet, and stares at them with an expression one guest described as heartbreaking loneliness. Then she's gone, not walking, not fading, just suddenly absent, like a television switching off. The 10th floor hallway has its own collection of impossible encounters. Marcus Webb worked hotel security from 2003 to 2011. At least once a month, usually between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., he would see her, always at the far end of the hallway, near the window that overlooked Hollywood Boulevard, always in white, always blonde, always gone the moment he took a step toward her. The Tropicana Pool has its own stories. Guests swimming late at night report seeing a woman in a white swimsuit sitting on one of the lounge chairs. She's there in their peripheral vision, but when they turn to look directly at her, the chair is empty. Pool attendants arriving at 5 a.m. find a single lounge chair pulled out, angled toward the water, as if someone had been sitting there watching the sunrise. The chair is always dry. There are no footprints. Just a chair positioned exactly where photographers used to direct a young Marilyn to pose decades earlier. And then there's the scent, the impossible, undeniable scent that appears in places where it has no logical explanation. If you were young in the 1950s, you remember what Chanel No. 5 meant. It wasn't just perfume, it was aspiration, sophistication. Marilyn Monroe made it famous. When a journalist asked what she wore to bed, she answered, Chanel No. 5. And at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, housekeeping staff have been smelling it in empty rooms for 60 years. The reports are too consistent to dismiss. A housekeeper unlocks a room that hasn't been occupied in 3 days. The moment the door opens, the scent hits, strong, distinctive, unmistakably Chanel No. 5. Not a faint trace, a fresh application, as if someone had just sprayed it moments before the door opened. The housekeeper checks everywhere. No perfume bottles, no clothing. The last occupant was a 70-year-old man traveling alone. The room has been empty and locked for 72 hours. There is no logical explanation, but it's there, and it happens most frequently on the 10th floor, near Suite 1200. Night managers have a protocol now. If you smell Chanel number 5 in an area where no guest should be, you document it, you radio security, and you keep walking. You don't investigate, because staff members who've spent too long in rooms where that scent appears have reported other phenomena: the sound of heels on marble floors when no one is walking, the sensation of being watched from corners where no one stands. One housekeeper was cleaning Suite 1200 in 2008. The room was empty, scheduled for deep cleaning. As she was changing bed sheets, she smelled it, Chanel number 5, so strong it made her eyes water. She turned toward the bathroom, and in the doorway, for less than 3 seconds, she saw her, Marilyn Monroe. Not translucent, not ghostly, solid, real, wearing a white terry-cloth robe and those famous cat-eye glasses. The woman looked directly at her, and she could have sworn she saw recognition in those eyes. Then she was gone, just the smell of perfume and an empty doorway. That housekeeper quit 2 weeks later, but the smell remains, and so do the sightings. In 2003, ghost hunters sent a team to investigate the Roosevelt Hotel. They brought electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, digital voice recorders, and healthy skepticism. They set up equipment in Suite 1200, the 10th floor hallway, and the Tropicana Pool area. And at 3:47 a.m. on their second night, they captured something that made even the skeptics pause. A woman's voice, clear and unmistakable on the digital recording, saying 2 words, "Help me." The voice didn't come through in real time. No one heard it during the investigation, but when they played back the audio hours later, there it was, a clear, desperate plea in a voice that matched the tonal frequency of Marilyn Monroe's speaking voice. They checked for radio interference, for audio bleed from other rooms, for any logical explanation. They found none. Audio forensics experts confirmed the voice pattern matched archived recordings of Marilyn Monroe's speech patterns, specifically the vulnerable, unguarded tone she used in private conversations. In 2015, paranormal research group Chris spent 3 nights at the Roosevelt conducting thermal imaging investigations. In the 10th floor hallway at 2:30 a.m. on their second night, they captured something remarkable: a thermal signature consistent with human body temperature, shaped like a woman in a dress, moving down the hallway from Suite 1200 toward the elevator bank. The figure appeared on thermal imaging for approximately 8 seconds. It moved at normal walking speed, and then it disappeared, not walking into a room, not turning a corner, just vanishing as if it had never been there. A human-shaped heat source with no actual human body to generate it. And then came the People magazine investigation of 2024, when People magazine announced they were sending a team of mother-daughter paranormal investigators, the Ghost Moms, to spend a night at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. Skeptics assumed it was a publicity stunt, but what they documented forced even skeptics to reconsider. The team consisted of 4 women with backgrounds in psychology, audio engineering, and criminal investigation. Their investigation began at 10 p.m. on a Friday in March 2024. For the first 2 hours, nothing unusual occurred, but at 12:47 a.m., every piece of equipment in Suite 1200 triggered simultaneously. EMF detectors spiked to levels that suggested massive electromagnetic interference. The temperature dropped 12 degrees in under 30 seconds, and on the stationary camera pointed at the room's window, a shadow appeared, not cast by any object in the room. A shadow shaped like a woman, standing near the window where Marilyn had reportedly spent hours staring down at Hollywood Boulevard. The Ghost Moms documented everything, EMF readings jumping from 0.2 milligauss to 87 milligauss in less than 5 seconds. The temperature drop filmed on thermal imaging camera, showing the room's ambient heat bleeding away from a central point near the window, as if something cold had entered the space. And they captured audio that made even the most skeptical member reconsider her assumptions. A voice, female, speaking in the breathy, slightly childlike inflection that Marilyn Monroe had made famous. The words, cleaned up and enhanced by audio software, "I'm still here." But the most dramatic evidence came from the Blossom Ballroom at 2:15 a.m. The Ghost Moms set up EVP equipment in the room where the first Academy Awards had been held. After several questions, one investigator asked, "Marilyn, are you still waiting for your Oscar?" The response came immediately. Not a voice, not laughter, But the sound of heels on wooden floor, walking from one end of the ballroom to the other, clear and unmistakable on their audio recording. The investigators stood frozen, listening to footsteps that had no visible source, and then the sound stopped. Just silence and the distant hum of Los Angeles traffic outside. People magazine published their findings in April 2024. The article went viral, and bookings for Suite 1200 increased by 300%. If you analyze all reported sightings, all audio recordings, all witness testimonies from 7 decades of Roosevelt hauntings, a pattern emerges. Marilyn doesn't appear in moments of joy. She doesn't manifest during parties or celebrations. She appears in lonely moments, at 3 a.m. when hallways are empty, in rooms where single guests sleep alone, to housekeepers working solitary early morning shifts. The timing suggests something heartbreaking, that whatever remains of Marilyn Monroe is trapped in the emotional state she inhabited at the end of her life, alone, isolated despite fame, desperate to be seen as something more than a beautiful object. The Help Me EVP wasn't an isolated incident. Subsequent investigations have recorded similar phrases: "I'm cold, don't leave, can you see me?" Each recorded in that distinctive breathy voice, each suggesting a consciousness that's aware of its isolation, reaching out across whatever barrier separates the living from the dead. If they represent genuine communication from a deceased consciousness, that consciousness is experiencing a loop, reliving the same emotions, the same fears, the same desperate need for connection that characterized Marilyn's final years. She's trapped in a psychological state bound to the place where her dreams began. The pattern extends to the types of people who report sightings. They're rarely paranormal enthusiasts actively seeking an encounter. They're mostly ordinary guests with no particular interest in ghosts, businessmen traveling alone, honeymooning couples, film students, and overwhelmingly they report the same emotional response: crushing sadness. A grief so profound it feels external, as if it's being broadcast from somewhere outside their own psyche. One guest described it as walking into someone else's depression. This emotional transmission suggests that whatever phenomenon is occurring at the Roosevelt, it broadcasts emotion, and the emotion it broadcasts is the same one that killed Marilyn Monroe, the unbearable isolation of being the most famous woman in the world and having no one who truly knows you. But there's one more pattern, one more detail that ties all of these reports together. Every sighting, every apparition, every thermal imaging capture, every witness description includes the same detail: a white dress. Not the iconic subway great dress from the 7-Year Itch, not the sparkly gown she wore to sing "Happy Birthday, Mr. President." A simple white dress, sometimes described as a sundress, sometimes as a slip-style dress, sometimes as a white terry cloth robe, but always white, always simple, always the kind of thing a young model might wear to a poolside photo shoot in 1949. That's the Marilyn who appears at the Roosevelt, not the icon, not the superstar. The young woman who lived in Suite 1200, who practiced her smile in that full-length mirror, who posed by the Tropicana Pool believing she was at the beginning of something wonderful. This detail haunts researchers more than any EVP or thermal image, because it suggests that whatever consciousness lingers at the Roosevelt Hotel is trapped in time as well as space. It's not the full scope of Marilyn Monroe's life. It's just one fragment of her existence preserved in amber, repeating endlessly in the place where she was most hopeful, before the disappointments, before the betrayals, before she learned that Hollywood would love her image but never love her, before she discovered that being desired by millions still leaves you alone in the dark. The white dress is a ghost uniform, and it tells us that Marilyn Monroe, or the echo of her that remains, is forever 23 years old, forever hopeful, forever standing by that pool waiting for a photographer to notice something special. She doesn't know yet that in 13 years she'll be dead. She's frozen in the moment before everything went wrong, and at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, that moment keeps happening, over and over, night after night. So is it real? Is Marilyn Monroe actually haunting the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel? The evidence is substantial. 7 decades of consistent reports, thermal images, audio recordings, electromagnetic field spikes, witness testimonies from dozens of people who had no knowledge of the hotel's history. The pattern is too consistent to dismiss as pure suggestion or mass hysteria. But evidence of anomalous phenomena doesn't prove these phenomena are caused by the lingering consciousness of Marilyn Monroe. There are other explanations, Residual energy theories suggest traumatic or emotionally significant events can imprint themselves on physical locations, creating recordings that replay under certain conditions. Quantum consciousness theories propose that consciousness might have quantum properties, allowing it to persist in ways we don't yet understand. Psychological explanations matter too. Suggestion is powerful, grief plays a role, but here's what psychological explanations can't account for. The people who had no idea, the guest from Germany who spoke minimal English and had never heard of Marilyn Monroe, who called the front desk confused because there was a blonde woman in his bathroom who disappeared when he approached. The child, an 8-year-old girl in 2016 who drew a picture of the pretty lady in the hallway and spontaneously described a white dress and platinum blonde hair, despite her parents never mentioning the hotel's history. The question of whether it's real might be the wrong question. The better question is, what is actually happening at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel? Something is generating consistent reports across 7 decades. Whether that something is Marilyn Monroe's actual ghost, or a quantum information pattern, or a psychological phenomenon, or something else entirely, something is there, and it takes the form of a young woman in a white dress, appearing in mirrors and hallways, smelling like Chanel No. 5, crying in empty rooms, asking for help that never comes, and real enough that staff members still avoid that 10th-floor hallway when they work the graveyard shift. Today, the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel embraces its haunted reputation. Paranormal enthusiasts pay premium rates to stay in Suite 1200, hoping for an encounter with the most famous ghost in Hollywood. The hotel offers ghost tours, but for the staff who work there, who encounter these phenomena when they're not trying to, it's less romantic, it's unsettling. It's the sound of heels when no one is walking. It's the smell of perfume in locked rooms. It's the feeling of being watched by someone who isn't there. The mirror from Suite 1200, the original that started all of this, remains in storage, wrapped, protected. The hotel has been asked multiple times to display it. They've refused. Some objects are better left alone. That mirror watched Marilyn Monroe transform from Norma Jeane into an icon, and maybe it absorbed something in that process. But you can't lock away perfume. You can't wrap sound in protective cloth. Whatever phenomenon is occurring at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel doesn't respect storage protocols. It appears when it wants to appear. It broadcasts sadness to people who aren't looking for it. It walks hallways that should be empty. And it takes the form of Hollywood's most iconic tragedy, a woman who was beautiful enough to be worshipped but too human to survive worship. A woman who wanted to be taken seriously but was only valued for how she looked. A woman who died alone despite being famous around the world. So the next time you walk past the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, look up at the 10th floor and ask yourself if you were Marilyn Monroe, if you'd lived those last desperate years, if you'd died the way she died, would you be able to leave the place where you'd once believed everything was possible? The Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel opened in 1927. It hosted the first Academy Awards in 1929. And somewhere between those golden beginnings and August 5, 1962, it became the eternal home of a woman who wanted more than beauty, more than fame, more than shallow adoration. She wanted to be known. And at the Roosevelt Hotel, in the mirror of Suite 1200, in the scent of Chanel No. 5 that appears in empty rooms, maybe she still is, still trying to be seen, still asking for help, still trapped in the moment before everything went wrong. Not a ghost. Not exactly, but not quite gone either. Just there, in that impossible space between memory and presence, where Hollywood's brightest star became its most persistent shadow.